Hi there, I'm your host, Gary Axelbank, and welcome to In the District. In 2013, at the age of 25, our guest became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the Bronx. He served in City Council District 15 for 7 years, and in 2020 was elected as the first openly gay Afro-Latino Congress member, serving New York's 15th Congressional District, which is the only Bronx Congressional District. So please join me in welcoming Congressman Ritchie Torres to In the District at BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx. Nice to have you with us, Congressman.
Always an honor.
Let's just get right into it. We have so much to talk about. What was the process like for what the president called one big, beautiful bill? Charles Schumer, I think yesterday, said it was the ugly bill, but that is the budget bill that was approved by the House by one slim vote. I heard it was negotiated all night.
We were voting all night, and we did not finish voting until like 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning.
That's rather unusual, I would guess.
It's highly unusual. And, you know, I have to say, in my 2 decades in public office, it is the single worst piece of legislation that I've ever seen. The reconciliation bill would defund healthcare and food more than $1 trillion in order to provide more than $1 trillion in tax cuts for the top 1%. And keep in mind, the top 1% has more than 10 times more wealth than the bottom 50%. And so I cannot think of a more egregious misplacement of priorities. It makes severe cuts to SNAP, food assistance, to Medicaid. And there's no county in America that has a greater stake in Medicaid than the Bronx. Like New York 15 has the highest rate of Medicaid enrollment in the country. 67% of my district is enrolled in Medicaid. And Medicaid is not only health insurance for the lowest income, but increasingly it's become long-term care for the elderly, the disabled, and the chronically ill. Even though the disabled and the elderly make up 20% of Medicaid enrollees in New York, they account for 60% of the expenses. And so make no mistake, an attack on Medicaid is an attack on the elderly and the disabled and the most vulnerable people in our society.
The vote passed by, we were just talking about this before the show, the vote passed by one single vote. 2 Republicans voted against it. The sense was that there were more who would have. Do you get the sense that they were threatened, that there was real pressure, that if they didn't, then all of a sudden they'd be challenged in their, their next election, et cetera?
Look, I've never seen a political figure who has as much control over a political party as Donald Trump has over the Republican Party. The Republican Party is no longer a normal, traditional political party. It's become a cult of personality around Donald Trump. And there are so-called moderate Republicans who live in fear of a primary challenge and will do whatever Donald Trump tells them. I mean, you had moderate Republicans in states like New York who voted to eviscerate Medicaid, knowing that New York State receives $50 billion from the federal government. We're going to be hit the hardest by the savage attack on the social safety net.
The Times reported that analysis by the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, concluded that millions, as you've talked about, could lose food stamp benefits, et cetera, et cetera. It hits the Bronx particularly hard because we use more Medicaid than anybody else. Do you feel like the Bronx, and you maybe personally, are targeted? Do you think that they say, you know what, that's the core of what we want to stop? I don't want to over-exaggerate that, but I'm just curious, are you, in a way, feel singled out in these kinds of processes where your constituents feel it the worst and feel the hit the hardest?
There's no place that has been more underserved in America than the Bronx. When America sneezes, the Bronx gets the flu. It always has been. And hopefully one day it will change, but 13.7 million Americans are going to lose their health care under Donald Trump and congressional Republicans. The reconciliation bill is a $715 billion attack on Medicaid. And there's not a single hospital in the Bronx that could survive draconian cuts to Medicaid. Almost every hospital in the Bronx is either in the red or teetering on the brink. And keep in mind, it's not only about the lives of people, it's also about the livelihoods of those who are employed by hospitals that depend heavily on Medicaid. The largest employer in the Bronx is the Montefiore Health System, which employs tens of thousands of people.
And as an industry, it is our largest
It's
employer.
20% of our economy, depends heavily on Medicaid, and it is often the case that in most rural and urban counties in America, the largest employer is the healthcare provider.
The Senate has to approve it. Now, as I understand from what I've read, there are conservative Republicans who don't like this bill.
Yeah.
So are you concerned that if, in fact, that carries the day in the Senate, the bill will continue to go, rather than in the direction you and other Democrats would like, but even further in the other direction?
Look, I worry it could get worse, and the stakes are a matter of life and death. I mean, I have constituents who depend on Medicaid for their survival. I spoke to a woman named Phyllis Lombardi who has a son that has severe autism. And at first, her son had no Medicaid. So she had to spend all of her retirement funds and sell her home in order to get her son the care he needed. And finally, when he received Medicaid, it was a game changer, right? She would have been bankrupt were it not for Medicaid and the stability it brought her and her family. Or I have a constituent here in the Bronx, Jose Hernandez, who became paralyzed in his teenage years. His mother died from cancer, and were it not for his Medicaid-funded caregiver, he never would have been able to put himself through college and rebuild his life and become a leading advocate for those with disabilities. So, it's not only about dollars and cents, it's about lives and livelihoods.
So that really leads into what my next question was going to be. What happens? I mean, we'll wait and see what the Senate does, and we'll wait and see what happens. So then let's just say this actually goes through. People are just left out. They pick up the phone, they go to the doctor, and they try to get served, and it's not there. In other words, I'm trying to visualize what it will look like, what the healthcare world will look like if, in fact, this goes all the way through.
It means less funding for our hospitals, less funding for our nursing homes, less funding for home care, less funding for assisted living, fewer physicians to care for people, longer waiting list. You're going to have a much more under-resourced social safety net than we even do now in the Bronx.
And then, I'm just trying to extrapolate further out. So then ultimately, people either are less healthy, they are poorer, you may fill up shelters and the homeless situation expands. I mean, to me, that would be the next steps if, in fact, this becomes reality.
We have more to lose than we have to gain from defunding a healthcare program as vital as Medicaid.
Wow.
No question.
Anything to talk about changing it, or now it's wait and see what the Senate does and go from there?
Look, we're depending on our Senate Democratic colleagues to do everything they can to derail the bill.
I would like to hear more, but I understand you're at your wit's end over it, really. Let's talk a little bit about the deportation situation. You have commented very directly about the lack of due process. The administration seems unwilling to follow judges' orders on deportations. What can be done to address the lack of adherence to those orders, or even simply respecting the judicial branch, which of course is an equal branch of government? Are we in for a constitutional crisis? Can they simply ignore judges' orders at this point? What happens?
We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis. Of all the abuses of the Trump presidency, none is a greater threat to individual freedom than his frontal assault on due process. And without due process, what is to stop the Trump administration from labeling any one of us a non-citizen gang member and abducting us in the dead of night and then sending us to a torture chamber in El Salvador? Like, due process is essential. And, the government abuses its power. It can falsely accuse, it can make mistakes, and due process is what protects us from abuses of power and false accusations. on the part of the government. And Donald Trump is violating the most ancient principle of Anglo-American law, which is habeas corpus. It's the idea that none of us can be deprived of our physical liberty without due process, without an opportunity to make our case in a court of law. And Donald Trump has shown a willingness to defy judicial orders. He is conspiring with the government of El Salvador to detain people in violation of judicial orders. And so I've introduced legislation that simply says if a federal court has ordered the release of a citizen or non-citizen and a foreign government refuses to comply, then we will revoke trade relations, we will impose sanctions, we will do everything we can to pressure the foreign government to facilitate the release in accordance with a judicial order.
There are reports about encounters with ICE agents, I'm sure you've heard more of them than I've read about in the newspapers, who don't have IDs, are in plain clothes, they don't follow the normal guidelines. If an NYPD officer needs to arrest somebody, there are procedures and guidelines. At times they're overly aggressive, not being very, you don't necessarily have to be polite, but you have to follow some sort of guidelines. They don't identify themselves, they're not wearing IDs. Is there any way to standardize this process in a way that some sense of due process is followed?
Well, there are standards, but Donald Trump is ignoring them. So the problem is Donald Trump. But we need to bring more professionalism to ICE, to immigration enforcement, because every law enforcement official should be wearing a uniform, should be producing identification, should be treating people with respect. Nothing is more foundational to our country than respect for the rights of the accused. I mean, if you look at the Bill of Rights, there are more provisions protecting the rights of the accused than there are even provisions protecting free speech or religious liberty. Like, there was a particular concern for the presumption of innocence and for due process, and that's something we need to honor.
Even the Secretary of Homeland Security didn't even know the simple definition of what habeas corpus was. It was shocking.
Look, it's only been around since 1215.
Well, we got to get her back to 7th grade history and social studies.
Magna Carta.
Anyway, Congressman, it's time to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get some thoughts from New York's 15th Congressional District Congress member. It is Ritchie Torres. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Hope you're enjoying today's In the District, our discussion with Ritchie Torres, the Congress member representing New York's 15th Congressional District. Let's talk about foreign policy. You have been an ardent supporter of Israel. Is it time now for the Israelis to simply stop bombing Gaza, to not only allow but encourage basic humanitarian aid and come to some negotiation so that what has been seen as an ethnic genocide can end?
Well, there's no genocide in Gaza, I want to be clear. I feel like that's a gross misuse of the term. But I think we have to put everything in context. First, there should be humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza in distress. But Israel did not start the war. The war was thrust upon Israel by the barbarism and terrorism of Hamas on October 7th, which is the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. And so Hamas began the war. And Hamas has the power to end the war. It should release the hostages, it should surrender unconditionally, and it should give Palestinians in Gaza a fighting chance at a decent life. So for me, the greatest stumbling block to ending the war is not Israel, it's Hamas.
But the killing of civilians has got to be disturbing to you and to many of us. I mean, that's a difficult thing to see.
But there's a difference between atrocities and accidents, right? These are accidents. I think every war is a tragedy. Do you have? Yes, I mean, I believe. I don't.
If you bomb a hospital, is that an accident?
Hamas is using the hospitals as a military site. I mean, it's well established that Hamas uses civilian infrastructure as military sites. There are weapons stored in hospitals. There are tunnels under hospitals and schools and mosques. So this is not like typical civilian infrastructure like here in the Bronx. It's quite different.
Where they'll just take away our Medicaid.
I'll give you an example. I mean, Gaza has a network of tunnels that is so expansive that it's half the New York City subway system.
If we were to have, I'm just speculating, just for the point of conversation. If we were to have a terror group infiltrating or using, our hospitals for this kind of, horrible, terrorism, wouldn't we deal with it in a more humanitarian way? Deal with that, maybe tell the hospitals it's got to empty out or do something so that I guess my concern and what many people are concerned about are innocent people getting caught in the middle of it. And then, of course, Donald Trump saying he's going to take 1 million people and send them to Libya. That's another thing.
I think most people, most decent people, want to see an end to the war. But my view is that the moral responsibility for a war lies with its cause. The moral responsibility for World War II does not lie with the United States and Britain. It lies with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And the moral responsibility for the war in Gaza lies with Hamas, which began the war on October 7th. And that's critical context that should not be ignored and overlooked.
You talked in the first segment about El Salvador and the president siding with El Salvador and making friends with them. He's cozied up to the brutal crown prince of Saudi Arabia and at the same time threatened our supposed allies in the European Union with tariffs. It's a full departure from what we have done in the past. Where do you think this is all headed? That all of a sudden our friends and the people that the President of the United States respects are dictators that in the past were kind of on the other side of the coin, and our friends were the democratic nations in Europe.
We live in a morally inverted universe where Donald Trump is treating our friends as enemies and treating our enemies as friends. I mean, he has shown more respect to Vladimir Putin, who's a war criminal, than he has to Europe, which is one of our strongest allies, the European Union. So I just feel like Donald Trump is doing an enormous amount of harm to the American reputation, to America's image in the world. And I worry the damage is going to endure long after his time in public office.
How do you weigh his latest statements after Russia, attacked Ukraine with their apparently their biggest attack in the war, and the president came out and said, "Well, Putin's out of his mind," and all the other things that he had said. How do you measure that? After you said that he cozies up to Putin, on the other hand, he ripped him publicly just the other day.
Look, Donald Trump is all over the place. He's as unstable as an Etch-a-Sketch, but he has been he's been largely catering to Putin, and now he's seen a change in tune because he has suddenly discovered that Putin is a profoundly evil war criminal who is deliberately targeting civilian populations and civilian infrastructure.
Do you think that he's backing off negotiating a peace settlement and saying, well, let it happen what happened, because he senses that Putin has the power to take care of business, and he really didn't, and Donald Trump really didn't care about Ukraine to begin with?
I mean, you saw how disrespectfully both the president and the vice president treated Zelensky.
Well, that's what makes me think that it's a bit of a PR game to say, well, I'm not going to do anything because he knows good. Let them do their
If you treat your ally Zelensky as the enemy and you treat Putin the enemy as your ally, then Putin has no incentive to end the war. He's simply going to string Donald Trump along indefinitely, and that's precisely what's happening.
The president is now trying to get a nuclear deal with Iran, pardon me for having a long memory, didn't we have a deal with Iran that when Trump was the president, he decided to back the United States out of that deal?
Donald Trump withdrew from the original JCPOA, he described it as the worst deal ever, and now he's in the process of negotiating essentially the same kind of deal.
So okay, so you agree with that.
The hypocrisy is staggering. Yeah.
You also, I believe, I saw a TikTok or some video of you concerned about the deal of the airplane from Qatar, the new Air Force One. Talk about what you think about that.
I mean, it's profoundly unethical and is or should be illegal for any president to receive a $400 million gift. The airplane is so extravagant that it's been described as a presidential palace in the sky, and it may be the largest foreign gift conferred on any president in American history. And I consider it a violation of the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits any elected official, including the president, from receiving a foreign gift without the approval of Congress. And so we should send a message that no one is above the law, not even Donald Trump. But keep in mind that the presidential palace in the sky is part of a broader pattern of presidential profiteering. You know, we've seen Donald Trump promote his personal meme coin. We've seen him sell his access to the White House to the highest bidders, like the 220 largest owners of his meme coin were given exclusive access to the White House and a dinner with the president. And we see his family promoting, the Trump family received $2 billion in foreign deposits from an Emirati-backed firm. And if you invest $2 billion in foreign deposits in the U.S. Treasury market yielding 4% a year, that's $80 million. That's just an indirect way of a foreign government putting $80 million in the pocket of the Trump family. It's corruption in plain sight.
I guess I'm just trying to process it and assuming what you say is true, it goes back to the judicial system to rope it in, but if there's no respect for the judicial system, I mean, I don't quite know what happens. You can't arrest people when when the judicial system doesn't control the Department of Justice or doesn't influence the Department of Justice, when it answers directly to the executive. Just trying to help our Bronx viewers to sort this out.
Look, for me, the lesson here is you can have the right structure and you can have the right laws, but laws can only take you so far. Ultimately, we need people in office who are going to follow laws and norms, who are going to act responsibly, who are going to be faithful to the Constitution, like the character of our leaders matter. And there's no one in America who has worse character than Donald Trump. He has no regard for our democratic norms and institutions. He's intent on dismantling them. We see him attempting to dismantle higher education, dismantle due process and habeas corpus, dismantle scientific and medical research. He has no regard for anything or anyone but himself.
What are your thoughts on the economy and the threats to the economy because of the tariffs? There's been a lot of talk about it. There's plenty of analysis out there. What do you think, from an economic standpoint, we're in for? Certainly nationwide, but of course more concerned here in the Bronx.
Look, the Trump tariff is a $600 billion tax on the American people. And the only certainty under Donald Trump is uncertainty. And an economy has no greater enemy than uncertainty. An economy is as much about psychology as it is about economics. It's all about confidence. Right? Consumers who no longer have confidence will stop consuming. And keep in mind, consumption is 70% of the American economy. Investors who no longer have confidence will stop investing. And businesses that no longer have confidence will stop hiring, will stop expanding. And the end result is an economic slowdown. And this is entirely inflicted by Donald Trump. It's a self-inflicted wound. None of this is necessary.
You have, let's talk we could talk national issues and international issues, but you had expressed concern that the Harlem River Environmental Restoration Project is in danger of losing federal funding. What does the city have to do to keep that project in place?
So we secured, Congressman Adriano Espaillat and myself, in partnership with local advocacy organizations, secured about $500,000 in federal funds for a feasibility study to be conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers. But in order for those funds to be accessed, the city has to provide a match. And the city has not yet provided a match. And we're in danger of losing those funds.
So at this point, is it a matter of asking whether it be the mayor or the next mayor, or whomever it is?
We need
to
the current
support
mayor,
the current mayor,
and the park and the DEP to provide the funding that we need to access the federal funds.
keeping it local. Do you have a choice for mayor?
Andrew Cuomo. I was the first to endorse him. Yeah.
And why is that? I mean, many people are concerned about his top-down attitude and, of course, his past that many people have questioned.
Well, he's by far the most popular of all the candidates here in the Bronx. And he's the only candidate who actually has experience running a complex government. Like, the effectiveness of Andrew Cuomo is not a matter of faith, it's a matter of fact. Right? The redevelopment of LaGuardia Airport is a fact. The creation of Moynihan Train Hall is a fact. The creation of Barrio Cuomo Bridge is a fact. And I think Governor Cuomo was one of the few executives in the 21st century who was a genuinely great builder of infrastructure. And we need to show that government can work, and it can build, and it can deliver for people.
Any last comments? We'll give you 30 seconds to say something to the people of the Bronx about what they've heard you say on this program and what's going on in Washington. Hang in there.
Look, for me, there's no greater honor than fighting for the people of the Bronx. And if there's any place in America that's resilient enough to survive the worst of a Donald Trump presidency, it's the boogie down Bronx.
I like that. Thank you so much, Congressman Torres, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
We appreciate it. That concludes tonight's program. We thank everyone for watching. And remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere at BronxNet.org, and we're also on YouTube. While you're there, be sure to follow BronxNet on social media to find out who will be the next community leader we will sit down with in the district. We thank Congressmember Torres for joining us, and thanks to our producer, Gabby Falcone, and our exceptional BronxNet technical crew. I'm Gary Axelbank. We'll see you around town, that's for sure. Good night.
Good to see you guys.